Senator Rex Patrick has been very active in this space and he joins us now. Welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, Patricia.
The Agriculture Minister, David Littleproud, has asked the Auditor-General to review all water purchases since 2008. Is that a good outcome?
Oh, look, I think it's just a distraction. I wrote, along with some of my parliamentary colleagues, to the Auditor-General back in April last year, and the Auditor-General has already put it on his list of considerations to examine the strategic buybacks on the Murray-Darling. That's already done. I think he's simply trying to distract the focus away from the real problem we've got, which is there's a lack of transparency here and now in relation to these purchases.
So you're saying a similar request was made to the Auditor-General last year, but that hasn't been clarified. So does this actually solidify it? Does it make it happen now? Does it actually change the situation?
Well, Minister Littleproud has no power over the Auditor-General. He is a parliamentary officer and reports to what's a committee called the JPCAA, which I'm on. But the Auditor-General has already indicated that he's considering doing this. The problem is that things have moved on since that audit request was made, in that we now have a situation where the whole affair involves entities in the Cayman Islands, and the Auditor-General can't look at matters outside of government, and that's why we need now to switch to a Royal Commission that has the jurisdiction to call in ministers, senior officials and indeed company officials, and to subpoena documents. What
sort of time frame would this Royal Commission cover? Because according to this request from the Agriculture Minister today, that would go back to 2008. Do you think it should go back to 2008 and cover Labor's time in power as well?
Well, I just want to go back to the South Australian Royal Commissioner, Brett Walker SC, who found that there was political interference with the Murray-Darling Basin Plan and, of course, maladministration. I think the governance of the entire Murray-Darling Basin Plan needs to be examined. So water buybacks would be part of any examination by a Royal Commissioner, but we actually need to look at the execution of the plan. There are a number of buyback issues. There have been compliance issues. There have been questions over whether or not climate change numbers used in the plan are correct. There's a whole range of issues that need to be looked at very seriously.
You want the release of the full unredacted documentation today, so does Labor. What questions remain unanswered that you want answered in this documentation? I mean, I described it to our viewers that it's literally, text over keywords. What do you think's in it?
Well, there's a couple of things I can give your listeners as an example. When the purchases were made in 2017, independent valuations were obtained by the government, paid for by the taxpayer, and that gave the government the range of prices and what would be a sensible price to pay for this water. That's been held in secret, and there's no reason for that. A second thing that has been completely redacted is the due diligence carried out by the Australian Government solicitor. So we know Barnaby Joyce last night said he wasn't aware of the company that was being dealt with here and the links to the Cayman Islands, but the Australian Government solicitor did due diligence, but that due diligence is completely blacked out in the documents that have been provided to the Senate.
No doubt, in fact, you just alluded to it. You heard my interview with Barnaby Joyce on RN Drive last night. Are you satisfied with the answers that he's given? Because he's essentially said it was arm's length. He left it to his department because he didn't want to be interventionist. What do you make of that argument?
Well, I'm a former Navy person, and everyone in the Navy knows that the captain is ultimately responsible for what happens on his ship, and so too is the minister in respect of his department. He was presented with a brief by the department. He had to properly consider that. He had a duty to make his own inquiries. He cannot claim he's at arm's length from this. He was the minister.
Barnaby Joyce says the Queensland Government wanted this water sold. Do you see the Queensland Government as complicit in this deal?
The Queensland Government could have made a recommendation to say that this was a good idea and it may have helped their situation. That doesn't take away the need for the minister to do his proper due diligence in accordance with the Commonwealth procurement rules, in accordance with government policy, to make sure that the taxpayer was getting value for money and to make sure he understood what entity he was having the Commonwealth enter into a contract with.
Centre Alliance are proposing new laws which would require require a company responding to a tender to disclose whether it or any of its entities are domiciled in a tax haven. Why is that important, and how would that operate?
Well, you can't have a situation where you have a government purporting to be strong on multinational tax avoidance, then on the other hand, blindly signing contracts with companies domiciled in tax havens. What I will do in the next Parliament is introduce a bill that requires anyone who tenders for a contract over $4 million to disclose any links with companies domiciled in tax havens. It will require officials to then conduct additional checks to make sure that there's no risk of tax avoidance or lack of transparency, and will also require departments in their annual reports to report the number of contracts and the total value of contracts that are made with companies that have links to companies that are domiciled in tax havens.
Part of Barnaby Joyce's frustration that he expressed in that very long interview with me was that Labor was essentially not being held to account for doing what he argued was the same thing. Now, Labor's argument has been they had an open tender, but either way, this idea that, you know, essentially a company domiciled in the Cayman Islands benefited. Do you think there's merit in that argument?
Look, I don't mind the Auditor-General, and indeed I think the Auditor-General will look at all of the purchases that have taken place under the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, and things will fall where they fall. But it's not proper for Barnaby Joyce to try and deflect his responsibility on Labor for a decision that he made as a Minister of the Crown. Tony
Burke was on AM this morning and, you know, basically said he didn't know it was in the Cayman Islands either. Should he have found out? Well,
I think that's the reason I'm proposing a bill. If we've got ministers who are unaware they are potentially entering into transactions with companies that are domiciled in tax havens, then we have a problem. And the bill that I've proposed today by way of press release, but I've got my team working on it back at Central Alliance headquarters, is one that will make sure that that never happens again.
Now, Labor has, of course, said that it wants a judicial inquiry if they are unhappy with the documents that they may get by 5 p.m. And, you know, we're watching this closely. I'll be speaking to Tony Burke to see, you know, what's received and what they make of it. But you've been calling for a royal commission. So if Labor promises by the end of today or in coming days for a judicial inquiry, will that not be going far enough, according to you?
Well, I'd have to look at the differences in powers and jurisdictions of the proposal that they make, but I think this needs to be quite wide-ranging, and the terms of reference would have to go to the governance of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. It is a $13 billion Commonwealth expenditure, and there is a lack of confidence in the public domain and quite a significant apprehension now as a result of this affair dubbed as Watergate.
I'm going to be picky and just pick you up on that. So you're saying that you're open to, perhaps, if you think it's robust enough, supporting a Labor proposal for a judicial inquiry, which isn't quite a royal commission?
Well, I think that would be a fallback position. I'm not a member of a government or alternative government, and we push very hard for these things to be dealt with properly and transparently. Once again, I'd have to look at what powers the judicial body had, and indeed what its jurisdiction and scope in terms of reference.
I want to thank you for coming in. It's been an interesting conversation.
Thank you.